All right, the public testimony from President Trump's former personal lawyer is reverberating throughout the political world as a congressional committee follows up on the threads that Michael Cohen dangled in his opening hearing. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerrold Nadler sent out a document or a request for documents saying this weekend he would add subpoenas if necessary to over 80 people and entities reaching out from the White House to the Department of Justice to members of the Trump Organization and beyond. A name that quickly came up, Allen Weisselberg. This guy is a longtime chief financial officer of the president's company. He's spoken to federal prosecutors in Manhattan following Cohen's guilty plea there and is expected to be called before the House Intelligence Committee soon. Nadler and the Judiciary Committee are scrutinizing Weisselberg over Michael Cohen's testimony that this check, which Cohen claims is part of the reimbursement for hush money paid to Stormy Daniels, was signed by Weisselberg, implicitly alleging that the Trump Organization was involved in a potential campaign finance violation. Also set to receive a request, Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, also allegedly signed this check to Cohen, which fits the set of $35,000 payments laid out in the Southern District of New York's criminal information that Cohen pleaded guilty to in 2018. But the clearest picture we're getting of what the Judiciary Committee is looking for came just this morning when a source provided NBC News with documents allegedly sent to former Trump campaign aide Sam Nunberg. The committee is asking Sam Nunberg for any and all documents relating to financial interests by Russia involving President Trump, Ivanka Trump, or Jared Kushner. Documents relating to the Trump Tower Moscow deal, the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, discussions of Russian sanctions prior to the inauguration, contacts with WikiLeaks and more. All of this showing the wide scope of the committee's probe into the president and his campaign. Now, the White House simply said it received the request for documents and that the White House's counsel office would respond and review. Just a moments ago, the president had this to say about the document request.
Are you going to cooperate with Mr. Nadler?
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax. You're going to learn about that as you grow older. It's a political hoax. There's no collusion.
All right, joining me now, NBC News intelligence and national security reporter Ken Delaney and NBC News contributor Jill Wine-Banks and former federal prosecutor Kathy Fleming. But I think I have just told a lie on TV because the guy I see on my screen is definitely not Ken Delaney. And, sir, who are you?
I'm a poor substitute for Ken Delaney, but I'll do my best.
You are absolutely not. Mike Memoli, NBC News political reporter. I apologize for that, Mike. I know you and Ken have been working on this together. Mike, the list of names, which we can put up on the wall there, is extensive. What jumps out at you?
Believe it or not, Ali, actually, committee sources tell me that when they first drew up a list of potential targets as part of this investigation that the Judiciary Committee is launching today, they started with over 150 names. They realized that they couldn't necessarily begin with that big of a number, so they tried to narrow it down, came down to the 81. Of course, there are some obvious headliners there, the White House itself, the FBI, the Justice Department. This sets up potential battles over executive privilege and what kind of documents the White House will itself turn over. Obviously, then we go to the family, Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, although we should mention not Ivanka Trump, his daughter. Then, of course, we have entities like the Trump transition team. We know there's been a lot of scrutiny into that, the Trump campaign itself. But what's interesting is, and it was interesting listening to the president's reaction to Jerry Nadler right now. These are two men with a history that goes back way into New York politics when Jerry Nadler, as a state assemblyman, was fighting the president, then Donald Trump's businessman attempts to build some buildings in Manhattan. But the president has been very clear about his businesses being a red line that he does not want investigators to cross. And Jerry Nadler is very much crossing that red line today. Some of the names you mentioned, Allen Weisselberg. We also see David Pecker, American Media. These are the National Enquirer. There's a lot of scrutiny of that. Rona Graff, who was his gatekeeper at Trump Tower for a long time. We know she's also spoken to the House Intelligence Committee already. But these are getting closer and closer into Trump's own business dealings. And that's certainly going to provoke a reaction from him down the road.
Jill, the Judiciary Committee, I mean, they are asking for a lot of documents from a lot of people. Jerry Nadler saying he might ask for more. What's the danger here of the committee looking like it's redoing the special counsel's work? Is that dangerous and possibly partisan looking?
I think what's important for people to understand is the role that Congress plays versus what Mueller does. Mueller is investigating violations of existing law. Congress has to look at whether there are laws that should exist, that don't currently exist, that would protect us from things that are just corrupt and wrong. And I think they have to look at all of the things that they are looking at. I think it's very fair to look at his business, his transition team, his campaign, his foundation, to see whether that is affecting how he is running the country. Is there something in his business dealings with Russia or Saudi Arabia that is influencing decisions being made in the White House? Those are things that need to be understood. And if there's not a law that says you have to turn over your financial information or your tax returns, maybe there needs to be in order for people to understand before they vote what they're voting for. So I don't think it's going to be a problem in terms of duplicating the work of Mueller. And whatever Mueller has and whatever his report says is not making it public. And people in America need to be brought into this. One of the things that worked in Watergate was that the Senate hearings let Americans know what the evidence was, and so that the American people supported the action of Congress because they knew about it. You can't operate in secrecy and expect to have public support for a political action.
Kathy, when you were a federal prosecutor, you dealt in political corruption. This business that Mike just talked about, Donald Trump having said initially that it'll cross a red line to look into his personal business, that's out the window now. That's just a silly request that no one should be paying attention to. Michael Cohen, if nobody else, brought it to the fore that Donald Trump's business interests, the Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, the Trump campaign, the inauguration, they're all mixed up, and in a lot of cases it's the same people helming them.
That's correct. And you have people who are being tour guides to take you through the analysis. It's not only Michael Cohen. We've got some other people who are also being tour guides here. So I think that what you're going to see is they're going to look at what all of the various documents are, what gets produced, who produces them, how long, who fights it, what gets turned over. They'll look particularly at the financial transactions, and they're going to see whether, in fact, the lines were blurred. I mean, one of the areas that they're looking at particularly is whether the emoluments clause was violated and whether the business and the presidency were in fact blurred. And so they'll come down to see whether that has in fact happened or whether the trusts that were set up in fact were effective and in fact the lines were not blurred.
Jill, take us back to Watergate. What's the right number of investigations and who should be doing them? There's a pent-up demand for proper investigations after certainly the first 2 years in which certainly the House side of things didn't manage it very well. The House Intel investigation was supposed to be one of the lead investigations, and we know for a fact, certainly with Devin Nunes in charge of it at the beginning, it just didn't do what it was supposed to do. So now there's a pent-up feeling post-midterm elections that they want the House to do the right thing. But we have 3 current investigations in the House plus the Senate investigations.
I don't think it's too many, and I think what has to happen, of course, is there has to be some deference to the ongoing criminal investigation. We were able to work very well with the Senate and ultimately with the House. I mean, we turned over information to the Judiciary Committee for their use as a roadmap to impeachment. But that was a situation where we had a bipartisan support for that. There was an actual impeachment hearing already going unrelated to us. And so we felt obligated to provide the evidence we had gathered so that they didn't have to spend a year regathering the same information. But as I said, I think there's different reasons for looking at these things, and that Congress has a constitutional obligation, checks and balances, their constitutional authority and responsibilities mandates that they have these hearings and that they do it in a respectful way, not to interfere with the ongoing criminal investigation.
Kathy, some of the names on the list included Jay Sekulow, for instance, the president's lawyer. Does he have to comply with the subpoena to provide documents, given that there's a attorney-client privilege? I'm just wondering what the roadblocks are.
Well, I think there are a number of roadblocks. It's not only his privilege, and remember, he's an attorney, and he was in a joint defense agreement, and unless and until a client waives or in a court says it's waived, he's obligated to follow that privilege.
So Congress can't have that waived on its own?
I think it's going to be difficult.
Right.
If they do, if they compel testimony, because a lawyer, of course, has to follow an order of a court or an order of Congress. No lawyer would violate that knowingly and flippantly, and Jay Sekulow will not do that.
Right.
But I think that he would take it to the legitimate courts, a judicial court, move to quash the subpoena, move to narrow it, move to do something before he would produce documents that he believes are covered by the attorney-client privilege or a joint defense privilege. Same thing with the FBI. As interesting as it is, and I, defense lawyer, I'd love to see the FBI have a lot of documents that can be subpoenaed. But in the first instance, if you're in a regular defense case, you have to comply with something called the TUI regulations, which says you have to make a showing to a court before you can apply for those documents. In this case, they're going to have a law enforcement privilege, which I suspect they may say that these are protected. We're protecting a criminal investigation. We shouldn't be required to turn these documents over. There's another one which some people may claim, which is there's an active production privilege. Even if you have documents, you have a Fifth Amendment privilege not to testify, and in limited circumstances you can say my actual production of documents, such as my tax returns, is testimonial, and that should be privileged. One of the things that is clear here is this is going to be full employment for Lawyers Week. There are going to be a lot of people reaching out to get counsel right now, and Congress is a little different animal than what most of us are used to. There are different rules and there are different standards that you have to apply. I did notice when I looked at the cover letter and the subpoenas to some of them, or not subpoenas, excuse me, they're requests. They're not subpoenas. So they are voluntary requests, and if you don't comply, then we'll subpoena you. But I did notice that in a lot of them, they said, look, we can cut a lot of your time off. Just give us what you've already produced to the special counsel's office or to any other law enforcement agency that's requested the documents. That's kind of interesting because as a lawyer, my first thought is that's work product privilege. What did I think was called for under those subpoenas? So there's going to be a lot of legal wrangling that goes on here, a lot of negotiating, legitimately so, before people just willy-nilly turn over the documents.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.